Uh, okay. All right. Twitter is up. Let's get Facebook up. Najat, you want to put a link for the policy forum in
Pardon
the
me?
you want to put the link to the Twitter feed in the policy forum group, or I'll do that.
Okay. The link of what? Of this what do you call
It's
it?
on our Twitter and on our Facebook.
Okay. So the link of this the link that you send me?
Yeah, we're live right now.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just
All right. Yes, we are
So do you want
live.
me
For
to
those who Yeah, I'll do it right now. For those who are joining in with us, we are live and we will start in just a second. Okay. All right, you ready to go? We are live, Najat.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Purim Sameach. Happy Purim holiday. For those who are unaware, it is the Jewish holiday of Purim. How are you, Najat?
I'm fine and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you. It's a fun holiday,
yeah.
unlike many of the Jewish holidays, which are more serious. Although the background to this holiday is quite serious. Its modern expression is very festive, almost like a Jewish carnival or a Jewish Halloween,
Yeah,
where
I
we
saw
are.
that when I was in Jerusalem a couple of days ago. It's so
Yeah.
fun.
How was your
Yeah.
trip, by the way?
It was good, very productive. Mostly it was in the university, at Hebrew University. It was only 2 days. There are a lot of things to do. And I missed a lot of other meetings, outside the university because there wasn't time, honestly, with this full schedule. But I'm hoping for other trips. Now I'm used to it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Just like I got used to going back and
Dubai.
forth to the UAE, and I'll be back on Sunday actually
Hmm.
in Abu Dhabi this time. You're now becoming a regular here in Israel, and we're so glad for it, especially now that we're working together through the Sharaka umbrella, and it's fantastic. So we're here today to discuss and to celebrate and to announce your new book, Twitter Diplomacy, Media Polarization Before and After the Abraham Accords. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for
How long
the whole arrangement. Thank you.
how long have you been working on this?
Since 2019.
Since
So
2019. Yeah. Wow.
yeah, long time. Yeah, long time. Then I stopped, and what took me longer time was the publication. Find me a publisher. That was much more hassle than writing the book itself. But finally, it's over now.
I'm now set to publish my second research book, and I can tell you that the editing process and the publication process takes longer than the research and writing.
Yeah,
I think
of course.
most people on the outside aren't aware of that.
Yeah.
So, how did you come to write a book? What inspired you to write a book about Twitter diplomacy? And actually, maybe the first question: what is Twitter diplomacy?
Well, let me answer the first part, which is what how this was driven. First of all, because of all what I see from the media polarization, and it's not only media polarization simply. It is a more it's more enlarged to the extent that it is attacking political leaders and also countries to the extent that eventually it will harm its national security. So it's not a matter of disagreement or only merely bias or disinformation. The fact it is accelerated to the extent that it could be much more harmful than anybody can expect. So I was thinking, what will be done? And we were talking a lot about alternative media, alternative mainstream media, but it didn't work out. And since everybody was using Twitter, then I was searching more and more about digital diplomacy until I came up to the diplomacy. Regarding your second part of the question, what is Twitter diplomacy? It's basically politicians and diplomats using Twitter as a format.
Okay.
So it is a form. It is driven out of diplomacy. And the definition of diplomacy is basically an attempt by international envoy or practitioner to manage the international environment. And then the Twitter diplomacy is part of digital diplomacy, which is part of public diplomacy. So it's all under the umbrella of diplomacy, public diplomacy, digital diplomacy, and then comes under it Twitter diplomacy.
Got it. So, I mean, that'll lead me to ask two questions. How is Twitter diplomacy different from other forms of digital or social media diplomacy? Meaning, why did you focus specifically on Twitter and not Facebook, Instagram, I don't know what? And secondly, how is this different from governments or diplomats getting messaging out through traditional mainstream media?
Is part of digital diplomacy. Digital diplomacy includes a lot of things, and not social media platform, anything digital. Call it website, call it mobile application, call it anything that deals with digital. So Twitter diplomacy is a small part of digital diplomacy. Yeah, you're answering your question, why did I choose Twitter diplomacy? Because basically most politicians are using these days Twitter. Yeah, and more than any social media platform. You rarely see a politician or diplomat using frequently an Instagram or Facebook or TikTok, for example, or an Instagram. They're mainly using Twitter. So it is mainly, Twitter is known for political usage, part of political communication, digital communication, in the political arena. And also one of the main other things that made me choose Twitter, because of the high percentage of people from the Gulf using Twitter. Because my case study was initially Saudi Arabia and UAE. And when I looked up on the people who are beside the politicians, the regular people audience who are they're using Twitter more than any platform, especially those who are geared into politics. So that's why I picked up Twitter. So you could say based on the Arab social media outcome, the highest Arab citizens who are using Twitter are the Saudis, and then come the Egyptians, Algerians, and the Emiratis. So they are the highest users of Twitter, especially in political debates and political communication.
That's interesting. So your focus is, of course, on the Gulf, the Arab Gulf.
Yeah, and mainly Saudi Arabia and UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Saudi Arabia, of course, is by far the most populous country in the Gulf, followed by the UAE, the two easily most populous countries, if we look at residents in the area. Do the people of these countries, or even the diplomats or the politicians, do they use Twitter and Twitter diplomacy or Twitter for public messaging more than, say, Americans or Europeans or East Asians or other parts of the world? Is there something unique, or is this because that's where you're based and that's what sparked your interest?
Well, first of all, because that's what I'm focusing on in my study is basically mainstream media in the U.S. and the U.K. polarization against Saudi Arabia and UAE, and four
Mhm.
main topics: Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, including Jamal Khashoggi, because he was Muslim Brotherhood advocate, the crisis at that time I started the study, and the war in Yemen. So basically, that was one of the reason that I picked up Saudi Arabia and UAE specifically. Beside, starting from 2019, there were a lot of deals and collaborations between UAE and Saudi Arabia specifically in many
Mm.
fields, including the media. There were MOUs between them in many fields, including the media. So that's why I picked them both. And beside, and this study is basically the period of it is from 2015 and 2019. But after the Abraham Accord happened, I added a chapter in the Abraham Accord. Regarding those who are using Twitter, is not only definitely the Gulf. There are other leaders who are using the Twitter political leaders, and the highest followers of those the most followed political leaders are definitely, when I started this study, Donald Trump, the former American president, the Prime Minister of India, the Pope. The Pope is also one of the highest followed, and other leaders, the Turkish and also Queen Rania is also one of the highest top. But regarding the Arab leaders, the most followed ones were Queen Rania and Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, King Salman, and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. So the most followed ones in the Arab world were mostly from the Arab Gulf. Probably there are others who are also the most followed, more the Gulf even.
That I find that interesting because even if we look at the Arab Gulf, how many people live in the entire Arab Gulf region? Maybe 40 million, 45 million people total in the entire Arab Gulf
Yeah,
region.
you could say
Maybe
also
more,
between Saudi
include
Arabia
Yemen.
and the UAE, because those are the focus, 40
Yeah.
million. 30 million in Saudi
Well,
Arabia and 10 million approximately in UAE.
I mean, I never really thought about this, but it's interesting because if you look at top UAE officials, if you look at Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, if you look at Abdullah bin Zayed, if you look at some of the top, Mohammed bin Rashid, and some of the top sheikhs and the top officials in the UAE of a small country, you look at in Saudi, and you compare that, let's say, even to the United States. The United States population alone is over 300 million, and yet just from glancing at some numbers that you sent me before, it seems like you know Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the leader of a country of 10 million people, has as many or more followers than a Donald Trump or certainly most other American politicians. How can you did you give it any thought as to why a smaller area would have the leaders are more prominently featured in Twitter than in other areas, let's say the United States?
Well, the United States is still the top. Donald Trump was the highest followed leader among
Mm.
all, even more than the Arab Gulf leaders. And also, it depends how frequently the people are using this kind of social media platform, because those
Okay.
political leaders, if they don't see the people are that engaged in that social media platform, you won't see them using this kind of social media platform, because the people are so much engaged in those social media platforms. They are engaged in it. And the other thing, that doesn't only depend on the population of there are other matters, like how frequently the citizens are using the social media. Like, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they call Twitter the Saudi parliament. They want to change anything on the ground, they use Twitter through using the trend. So it is that much used. And also, if you look at the foreign ministries, not only the leaders, the highest followed foreign ministry or department is the U.S. Department of State. Number 2 immediately come after it globally. I'm talking globally. The Saudi foreign ministry. It is number two immediately after the U.S. So that shows you how much it is active.
Interesting. So you examined so primarily Saudi and Emirati officials and their tweets regarding primarily Iran, Muslim Brotherhood, and the Khashoggi killing, Qatar, back when that was more of a hot issue, and the war in Yemen, and then of course you added a chapter on the Abraham Accords. What was the strategy, or what were your findings that these governments were doing in regards to these different flashpoints or these different hotspots? Can you take us through your process and your findings?
Well, in order to come to the findings, it was a very long process. First of all, I studied all the polarization in the mainstream media in the US and the UK, and the fact that I picked up the US and the UK because they are written in English, and anything they write about is going to be influential globally. So it's not their impact is not going to be only to these countries, but it's going to be global. So that's why I picked them.
What do you mean by polarization? Can you explain that? Expand on that?
The polarization is basically, first of all, there's a quite a difference of the conservative media and also the media which is mainly liberal. And now it is even more geared to the left. So from this case, there's a polarization. And unfortunately, the kind of partisan lack of bipartisan agreement politically between the parties, especially in the US, are unfortunately reflected in the media. So we see the differences between the two parties, and we see the reflection on that on the mainstream media. For example, the same topic, when you see it in the conservative media or you read it in the conservative media, it's different than the mainstream media. Like, for example, let's say any one of those subjects that I covered, the way it is covered on Fox News, for example, will be different than, for example, the CNN.
Right, so, right. I mean, I remember this. I used to be an Iran watcher, an Iran follower professionally, and then also I spoke about the Middle East for a long time, as you know, and certainly, if let's give an example just to our listeners here. If you go into Iran, in the build-up to the JCPOA, for example. So if you were to watch Fox News, or if you were to watch more conservative news, you hear about the dangers of Iran. You hear about Iran's support of extremist militias, develop ballistic missiles, how it never really abides by deals. And I think conversely, what would the mainstream media have said about Iran, for example, from your research?
Well, regarding, for example, Iran, because it's involved in many things. Let's say, for example, the way they covered the Houthis. Okay, so basically, the Houthis is a militia that is supported by Iran. So in this case, when you see it covered in the mainstream media, it's basically not showing how it is basically supported by Iran. And they mainly focus the humanitarian issue, regardless that this militia first of all, it is a militia, so it's very hard to have any kind of political deals between them because they never abide by any agreement. And secondly, the problem, or they don't show in the mainstream media that the fact that Iran is supportive of militias is the main difference. Is not basically the difference because, and this is Sunnah, as the mainstream media is trying to show, it is basically dealing with national security and the fact that it is basically supportive of militias, which is a huge threat of the nationality. This is something that is not shown in the mainstream media, the danger of Iranians' support to militias. And that is more shown and revealed in the conservative media. So I'm not saying that the conservative media is supportive of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but it is more neutral. While we see it like kind of more attacking regarding them, towards them, and the main thing is because of those differences in political parties. Like the liberal parties in general, they see political Islam, including Iran and, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood also, they see them as antidotes to killers, to fighters like Daesh, like Al Qaeda, like Al Nusra. They see them as antidotes. So, in order to tame them, they use political Islamists. And this is totally different than the views of the moderate Arabs like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. On the other hand, the conservative parties see political Islamists as a gateway of extremism. So if you support Iran or you support the political Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood, they are ideologically the extremists gateway to those fighters and killers like Daesh and Al Qaeda. So there's no difference, but one is wearing tie and clean cut, and the other one is fighting and killing. But ideologically, they're both the same. So that's why you see politically, the Arab Gulf countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia are more lean towards the conservative parties, while those who are driven to the political Islamist ideologies are more lean toward the liberal parties. And all of that, you see it reflected in the media. And that's what I meant by polarization.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, you're basically hitting on a very deep point here in that, first of all, that the mainstream media in the West, which tends to be more on the liberal side, is, you're saying, first of all, it's out of sync with what the mainstream governments and publics in the Middle East are saying and thinking.
Yeah, especially what we call the moderate axis. The moderate axis.
Do you have an explanation? Because one would think, and maybe it's just me. I grew up in the United States with an American education. Maybe I would think that it's usually conservatives that are blamed for kind of doing everything in an American-centric way, let's say, or a Euro-centric way, or a British-centric way. But what you're saying here is that, if anything, it's the liberal media outlets that are out of tune or out of coordination with what is more or less the mainstream opinions and views in the Middle East. How can that be? Or how did that come to be?
Because it is all referred to what I mentioned to you. Those moderate axis see those political Islamists mainly are extremists, because the main extremism is not by individuals who are bombing. It is basically here in the ideology, and the main ideology is driven out of the books and the thoughts of those political Islamists. So they are the ones who are preaching. So you couldn't say that those political Islamists are moderate only because they have sweet talk to the Western countries, and you exclude what they are teaching. The other thing, those political Islamists called it Sunnah, they are like giving sweet talk in English, while in Arabic, totally different. And you can see that even reflected in their media. For example, watch Al Jazeera. Yeah, Al Jazeera. Watch it in Arabic and watch it in English. It's totally different. And all of them have very gentle talk when they speak in English and to the Western world, while in Arabic is totally different. So basically, the moderate axis do not see political Islamists as the antidotes or the moderator to tame those extremists. They are all to them extremists, but the difference in style, the way they present themselves to the West. But in shortly, they are more hypocrite than those extremists. Can you
give us a few concrete examples of this kind of double talk that you mentioned, that in, for example, Al Jazeera in Arabic versus Al Jazeera in English. Can you give us an example of an issue, a specific issue that you researched, and what would be said in Arabic, or how an issue would be presented versus how it would be talked about in English?
Okay.
If you can recall any specific, things that you researched or saw.
Okay, so basically, if you watch Al Jazeera, it's all about like inflaming against the United States. It is encouraging for hatred, and like even if you go back during the war in Iraq, it is encouraging the Arab public to fight the American soldiers. To even Al Qardawi at that time, he was spreading fatwas to bomb and to kill American soldiers. While you never see such things in the English version, you see it. It's talking logically and talking to the and addressing the English. The English speaking in a very civilized way. Definitely, you won't see all of those hostile rhetoric that is inflaming for extremism and for killing and for hatred. You never see it in the English version, as if they are two separate channels. And that's what tempted me, and back in 2013, to write an article saying for non-Arabic speakers, Al Jazeera for non-Arabic speakers not to be fooled. So I showed the difference exactly between what is presented in Arabic and what is presented in English, and this is complete deception.
Interesting. I don't want to draw this to an Israel-related discussion, but it seems very similar to the media discussion regarding Israel between conservative and liberal outlets. I can tell you from my experience with Al Jazeera in English, it's I've never really thought about this before, because I know of Al Jazeera and Arabic's reputation, as you say. In English, they're very factual. It's decent journalism. I mean, they might open up a story, for example, about Israel by highlighting, the kind of more critical aspects of Israel, but they don't make things up generally about Israel. It's more, it seems to be good journalism, just presented in a way that's kind of very critical of Israel. And you're saying in Arabic, it's a lot more inflammatory. It's a lot more hostile. And then, of course, as you reached publication in 2019, or as you were going to publish it, we have the Abraham Accords. And that's where you and I met also for the first time, is through the opening up of the Abraham Accords. How did you shift your research, or what did you add, or what did you find in relation to the Abraham Accords?
I didn't hear you. You cut off. Just if you can just repeat the question, please.
Sure. When the Abraham Accords were announced and implemented, how did you decide to shift your research? How did it affect your work, which was already basically done by that point?
Okay, very good question. Actually, while I was writing and I was almost done with my book, I was the finding, one of the findings, but I wasn't able to write it down because it was hard at that time before the Abraham Accord. I was saying, like, UAE and Saudi Arabia need a strong ally in the region, and especially in the media sector, and which requires a lot of things. It's not only media; it's more than that. So I said, who's gonna partner with them in this? To partnership with think tanks, lobbies, institutes, and in the region and in the West, mainly the United States. The most eligible partner with them, in this field, will be Israel. So when and I said, like, there's no way to do it without a strong ally like this in the region, and Israel is the most eligible one, especially because of a strong existence in the West, especially the United States, and they have a grassroots existence, which is different than UAE and Saudi Arabia. So when this happened, it was like, to me, like the finding that I was, I got in my study, I saw it implemented. Finally I saw it. So that's why I added a chapter on it, on this, because it was part of the findings. And I said, I wish I started this book after the Abraham Accord, not after it. But
So
that's why I
what
added this
yeah.
chapter.
Did you see a polarization in the media regarding the Abraham Accords also?
Definitely.
How? How
Definitely.
did it play out?
Okay. Again, I see the conservative media is more pro the Abraham Accord more than the mainstream. For example, when I read it, I'm talking here English, not even in Arabic at all. They are quite hesitant. They are not sure. They are trying to bring suspicion on the Abraham Accord, especially it happens with countries that never had war with Israel. No, and they come back to formula number one, like in order to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, it has to go with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict before it goes with other countries in the region. We are returning back to the same formula one, even though it didn't work out for many, many years. So all of what I have read is either totally negative or suspicious. While when you go to the conservative media, no, it's much more to the Abraham Accord. And the same thing, by the way, I see it once after the Abraham Accord, I get closer to the Israeli media. I see this kind of suspicion even in the Israeli media. I see the conservative media is much more supportive, and the moderate one more than the left. They're quite, want to go back to the formula number one. So this is reflected, whatever is we see politically, it is reflected in the media.
Interesting. Do you think there's an agenda for that? Or do you think it's just that the certain people can't break out of the paradigm that's just been in place for so long? I mean, where do you think that comes from in regards to the Abraham Accords? And I'll tell you why I'm asking it. You and I have been now on a speaking tour of the United States, and we're about to go on another one to talk about the Abraham Accords with a few other people, and I've been on a couple others without you, and I see it also, by the way, in the American public between more conservative audiences and more liberal audiences, and people are surprised, especially on the liberal side, by the Abraham Accords. But when they talk to real people, from the region who are telling them this is very real and this is a very positive thing, they're very surprised. So it's kind of clicking to me now that a lot of what we see is shaped by the media that's around us. Why do you think? Why do you think the liberal media is not celebrating this as peace? Peace is something that people should always be celebrating. Maybe that's a naive question, but what are your thoughts on it?
No, it's a very important question. Well, because for many reasons. First of all, because politically they are driven to think this way, and the other thing, because they are used to this for many, many years, it's hard to think out of the box. Well, we are set to the idea that it has to be resolved between the two entities rather than going to the others who are quiet. They think they're involved directly. So to make a shock, it is, this, what happened, the Abraham Accord, I see it as revolutionary way of thinking. It is changing the formula that has been for more than 70 years. So now are like, no, we're making the Abraham Accord with those countries. And not only that, it's not only cold peace or government to government peace, but it's only people to people peace. That's what we want to do in order to solve this everlasting conflict. So a lot of people couldn't comprehend it. And beside that, there are a lot of political engagements because they are set politically like that. So that's one of these are the main reasons.
And are you still, I assume as part of your job, and part of your job as a professor, of course, and a columnist, do you still track Arab world and Western world social media on these issues?
Yeah, I write in both. That's why I always write in the social media and in the traditional media in both languages, Arabic and English, to target those audience and those audience both. I really wish that my articles will be also accepted in the mainstream media without alteration. Because unfortunately, most of my articles were published in the conservative media, and they already agree with what I say. I want to publish in the other mainstream media, but unfortunately, our articles are not accepted, or 2/3 of it is changed. So because I want to target both kind of media, the left and the right, I don't want to focus on one.
Of course, you don't want to preach to the choir, as they say.
Yeah.
Have you seen a shift in the last, you know, you and I, again, we've spoken on this on panels that we've been on. We've listened to lectures and panels about public opinion in the Arab world. Have you seen a shift in the broader Arab world, Arab social media, traditional media, public opinion regarding the Abraham Accords? Where was it when it was announced a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago? Where is it today? What kind of shift have you seen?
There are many good things that are happening, especially with the deals that are happening regarding the business deals. Now, I see the shift is going. I'm talking publicly, not as a governmental
Yes.
government corporation. Regarding government collaborations, it's going every. But regarding more the mainstream business deals in many fields, and it is working successfully, call it in IT and health and different sectors and environment, and different technology, environment technology, all of these matters. But I see, in order to have a strong impact on the public and really to strengthen it as truly one piece, is to work in two fields that don't see it working as the others: media and education. Still, I see those two sectors are quite slow in collaboration. We need more collaboration in the educational system in both countries, in the Abraham Accord countries and Israel. That's why I intensify my travels on the education part. That was the main purpose of my trip, last trip, is to bridge this gap. That's why I want to be exposed to the universities over there, to bring them here, and to vice versa, because this is what sustain truly the true peace and people, and definitely the media. And this is why I'm focused on media also. So these are two that will have an impact. It's quite slow. It's not as it should be.
Yeah, I mean, and this is partly, the part of the cooperation we're trying to do through Sharaka, through the platform, where you're heading our efforts in the media and in academic affairs. And I agree with you that those are really two crucial issues, because as you show in your book about the media, and as you deal with in your day-to-day life, those have, I think, deeper impact than a lot of other things, especially on shaping public opinion. If you had to give, well, let me ask you this: who is your intended audience? If you could choose one, of course, we hope everyone buys and reads this book, and we'll ask you to share the information with the audience on how they can purchase a copy of the book. But if you really wanted to influence one key demographic, who would that be? Who is your top target audience for this book?
My target audience are two parts. First of all, definitely political leaders, because I made a whole critical discourse, to those politicians whom are called diplomat, politicians and diplomats who are using this. And also, I made the chapter 6. I covered a lot of the foreign ministry in Israel, and I highlighted on the digital part unit, and especially the Arabic section. And I discussed that. I discussed different on that. So definitely, those in the diplomacy and political sectors are my target audience. And also, since I highlighted the importance of citizen diplomacy and the fact of the younger generation using social media to promote all of these polarized issues, definitely the younger generation is also my target, because I focus on diplomacy and the importance of generation of using the social media in a very constructive way.
Yeah, and that's something that didn't exist. I mean, certainly when I was a child, there wasn't such thing as social media, and And to think now, it's amazing the influence that citizens and private individuals can have, sometimes on the level of government, sometimes even more. I have to ask you a question. In Israel, we often hear that our diplomats, our foreign ministry, our government is ineffective in doing public diplomacy.
Mhm.
It's a critique that in Israel and in the broader Jewish world that we often have, and
Mhm.
maybe it's because there are so many haters, there are so many critics of Israel around the world who are actively critical, who are even looking to pick fights or play in according to very unfair rules, double standards. As kind of an outsider who was researching Arabic language public diplomacy, Twitter diplomacy, what if you had to give a grade to Israeli public diplomacy and Israeli public diplomacy in Arabic? What kind of grade would and you're also a professor, so you can give grades. What kind of grade would you give them in
Uh, public
effectiveness?
di- Public diplomacy. Well, the public diplomacy of Israel in terms of the traditional media, I'm sorry to say, it's very poor. It's not, and I wrote about that, by the way, in one of
Mm,
my articles. Even it's not doing, and that's why it's overshadowed by the propaganda of the other side.
mm. Which is very
And
strong and active. Yeah.
yeah, well, regarding especially lately, what they are doing in terms of the diplomacy, digital diplomacy, through using the social media, especially in the foreign ministry, is much better. But their
Okay.
traditional media is not doing well at all. And by the way, here Israel is sharing the same problem of UAE and Saudi Arabia in that, especially in
Which is
addressing the outside world. Not, unfortunately, other what we call it, the axis of resistance. Unfortunately, they're doing a better job than
hmm,
even even compared to UAE and Saudi, to address the outside world of the importance and the success of the access moderation that I wish Israel will be part of it. Now, the access of moderation is what? It's composed of Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, and Jordan, mainly. What I want throughout this study to include Israel part of the axis of moderation. The axis of resistance is basically the Iranian regime and the other Arab countries who are allied with it. Call it Iraq, Syria,
yeah.
Lebanon, okay, and definitely Qatar.
Yeah.
Even though it's Arab Gulf, but it's more leaned towards the axis of resistance. So we need to strengthen
Interesting.
our part
And
in
I
that
think
part.
that's yeah, that's right. And I, I don't know if it's numbers or when you are focused almost obsessively or cynically or being very proactive as is the access of resistance, and a lot of what they're saying are half truths or lies or exaggerations. It's easy to just pump it out there, and then you're putting the moderate axis, which now Saudi and UAE and Israel are all a part of this moderate axis, both on the defensive. And there's a saying in Hebrew, and I'll only use the end of it because the beginning of it is not appropriate for social media. But go prove that you don't have a sister, is a saying that we have here in Hebrew. And basically, it's twice as much work to try to dispel myths and lies and attacks than it is to just get your own message out. And so we're already at a disadvantage in the modern access because of this. If you had to give um, policy recommendations or strategy recommendations to decision makers, let's start with three groups of decision makers. Okay, um, Arab Gulf leaders, Israeli leaders, and maybe American or European leaders in regards to this. What would be your top policy recommendations?
Okay, let me here tell you, I want to very important. That when you are talking about the success of media, it's much more than only to have a satellite. It's more than that. It should have a back end. Actually, the back end is the main reason for its success. For example, why, for example, in that crisis, the Qatari crisis, why through my study, it's not my opinion, through my study, Qatari beat both UAE and Saudi Arabia in its media power,
Yeah, and it's much smaller.
especially. Yeah, and it's a small. Why? Because they worked so. Unfortunately, they worked, in the right track of it, because it is more than just only media. First of all,
Mm.
they have version and they have the English version. They know how to target the English speaking with their media,
Yeah.
even though it's hypocrite. While the Arabic media is a total, and they know, and while the Arabic version is basically targeting specific kind of people. They're not targeting people like me, of course, in the Arabic. I'm not part of their audience, but they're targeting successfully those who are believing in their ideologies. So they are successful in that, and those are the audience that they want to attract. Definitely, they don't want to attract to people like me. It is a hopeless case. And also, they are working in many fields, and that's what I advise both. The recommendation that I put in my study to UAE and Saudi Arabia, including Israel, there must be think tanks that study what are the content that should be successfully on this kind of media.
Mm.
Lobbies are so important. For example, why, for example, the lobbies in Qatar were much more successful than the lobbies in UAE and Saudi Arabia and the US, because they have grassroots. They have the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States that were lobbying for them. UAE and Saudi Arabia do not have those kind of lobbies, do not have that kind of grassroots influence in the US. So they are depending on the elites. And this is
Yeah.
where we need the Israel support. So think tanks, lobbies, we need, for example, joint media venture, like joint satellite news channel in English, definitely. We need, for example, mobile application use together. And beside that, we need to work together in terms of digital diplomacy, like the foreign ministries need to work together in order to have really strong content. Each one in each one is targeting a different issue, but collaboratively they work together. And definitely, you have to work in terms of citizen diplomacy, like the UAE and the Israeli citizens working together using the digital format, including the social media. So
Yeah,
that's
and yeah, go ahead, please. I cut you off.
yeah,
Sorry.
that's basically the main thing.
And I think the past few years shows us quite well, and I'm very encouraged by this. The power of social media. People often use it for negativity, but it shows. And I think the UAE and Saudi Arabia have done wonderful jobs locally and regionally in spreading moderation and fighting extremism through that. Our mutual friend and colleague, Dr. Frank Musmar, who is also a part of our Sharaka Scholars Forum, asks how terror organizations have utilized social media to spread hatred and how some others have utilized it to spread Islamophobia. Can you address that question?
How others spread the Islamophobia?
How terrorist organizations have taken advantage of social media to spread their hatred ideology, and how other organizations have used social media to spread Islamophobia.
Okay. Well, regarding those terrorist extremists, they are media hungry. And we see that among all those extremist groups. Call it Hezbollah, call it the Houthis, the Iranian regime, and they have their own affiliates in the social media. We see them even in the traditional media. We see Hassan Nasrallah, how he's all 24/7, he's on the media. His supporters are very active in the social media. And now with all those technologies that we have, they are using even the bots in order to attack others. So the technology is helping them to spread their ideologies. Like for example, you see the huge attack that happened even to me personally in my first visit to Israel. This can be real people, and it could be also not real people, and I can tell that the attack on the accounts and the hacking of the accounts that are happening, they're using all of that, and they're very savvy. What they are doing, they are spreading. It is working hand in hand. Their extremist ideologies in both traditional media, also the social media. So they're using it to complement each others. Regarding Islamophobic, unfortunately, those who are not aware, that's why it is so important then that we go and do these kind of delegations those the others who do not know a lot they can distinguish and don't lump Muslims as a general whole, because those people, the extremists, unfortunately, they have louder voices than the
Right.
moderate. The moderates are either they're cautious of what they say and they think about what they say, and some of them are afraid. It took me a long time to get courageous, and until now I'm worried because I don't have the financial support as the extremists. The extremists, though, a lot of people are saying you're not worried about yourself, so we need the backup. So if we're not Muslims, they think all Muslims are extremists, so accordingly they spread the Islamophobic terminologies because that's what they see. They see Hassan Nasrallah, they see Al-Houthis, they see
Right.
extremists, the Iranian regime, they see all of that talking loudly in the traditional media and the social media, and people like us, the moderate, they do not exist. So here, accordingly, you see the extremist ideologies are widespread, and you see accordingly, and based on that, as a result of that, you see the Islamic phobic rhetoric facing
Yeah.
this.
And I agree with you. And I think that's a big part of what we've been able to accomplish through our work together, through Sharaka, through many of these Twitter diplomats, is it's fighting extremism in the Middle East for sure, but it's also fighting Islamophobia in Israel, and in the West. And let's face it, it is an outcome because of exactly what you described it, because the extremists are so prominent on social media. If there are any other questions from people who are watching us live now on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and they will appear to us here on this platform, and we'll address them. In the meantime, I will say that for those of you who tuned in throughout, Sharaka is a non-governmental, non-political, non-profit project founded by young social entrepreneurs, by young leaders from the Gulf, from Israel, now with members from all over the Middle East. And we work to build warm ties on the sub-governmental levels, to build people-to-people ties, to build understanding between the cultures, first and foremost, the countries that are involved in the Abraham Accords, Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco now, with many friends like Najat who are also have Saudi connections. And we are expanding this. We also work to build support and awareness of the success of the Abraham Accords model, the paradigm in the West and on social media. If you would like to contact us, like our friend Med Benuna, who reached out from Morocco, you're welcome to do that. You can reach our Sharaka social media account is info@sharakang.com. You can reach me personally, Dan at sharakang.com. Najat is najat@sharakang.com. And you're welcome to see our past activities, media events, online events on our website at www.sharakang.com. Najat, can you please tell our listeners and friends today how they can get a copy of this fascinating and very timely book?
Okay. First of all, the actual launching of the book and the digital copy will be launched on March 29th. And the hard copy will be launched launched like a couple of weeks after, maybe 2 weeks maximum after that. If anybody who's interested in getting a copy of this book, there's a website here. I don't know if I can copy it and put it here. And
We will.
and they
Yeah,
can,
we'll put it on the social media link
yeah,
to
if
make
you
sure.
can kindly put it in the social media, Dan, and they just filled the box. So I have a database. Once the book is launched, I will send them the link of where to buy the book from.
Fantastic, fantastic. And the name of the book again for our listeners is?
Is Twitter Diplomacy, Media Polarization, before and after the Abraham Accords.
Fantastic. So we thank you, Dr. Najat Saied, who's joining us live now from Dubai, and I'm speaking to you from Israel. And we're glad we're able to be the first to promote this wonderful and very timely scholarly work with clear policy implications through this Sharaka platform. Dr. Najat and I will be leading and partaking on a speaking tour around leading universities in the United States and other communities over the next couple of weeks. If you are in the North Carolina, Atlanta, or Boston regions, do reach out to us and see if you can join one of our speaking engagements with a broader Sharaka delegation. Najat, I want to congratulate you on this
so
achievement. I've been we've been discussing this work together for the last year, and I know how hard it is to even if you have solid research and writing, to actually get the book out is quite an achievement. So congratulations. I look forward to reading it. I hope I can get an autographed copy of it when it comes out physically.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Once it comes, definitely.
And we're going to keep trying to help you publish it in Hebrew. So if you are connected to the Hebrew publishing world here in Israel and you want to take this on, do reach out to either Najat or to myself or to the organization, and we'll be glad to help that. And we thank you for your time. We congratulate you once again. Twitter Diplomacy, Media Polarization, before and after the Abraham Accords. Dr. Najat Saied, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone, and Chag Purim Sameach, Happy Purim to all those in Israel and in the Jewish communities around the world who are celebrating. And Najat, have a wonderful weekend. And maybe it's a little too early to wish Ramadan Mubarak. That's still a couple of weeks away. But if anybody is watching this next week or the week after, we will wish to all the Muslims around the world Ramadan Mubarak, as it is the next nearest holiday coming up also.